One, two, three, four. When I get the chance, I got time on my hands. I'm gonna do what I can to make it known, making it known. Hello, YouTube land. It's Anthony Scott here with another episode of Making It North, a web series about people who create and make stuff in Maine, about the stuff they make, how they make it, why, the joy it gives them and others. And today, my guests, yes, today I have two again, are Kim Smith and Craig Green. And among the many hats they both wear, they are both on the Presque Isle Historical Society. And they're here to talk about how creativity plays a key role in making the past come alive. And they have some really special projects. Well, I guess it's one project with cool projects in it that they're going to talk about today. Welcome, Craig. Welcome, Kim, to the show.
Hi, thank you for having us. We're very pleased to be here.
Thanks, Anthony.
Yes, I am super excited to be here. I've started becoming acquainted with the two of you over the last year and a half, I guess, especially you, Kim. Craig, I don't remember if one of my first tours of the Esty House, if you were there or not that night. We were the last ones that particular night. It's the first time Kylie was helping out with the tour. Yeah, I was really late. We were the last group to come through before you got shut down that evening. It was cold and icy and rainy, if I remember, as it often is, at certain times of the year here in Northern Maine. But anyway, it's so good to have you. I'm excited to get to talk to you. I got to tour the new project here just a few days ago, and it was really beautiful. And we're going to share some pics of that in a minute. But before we do, I want to give you guys an opportunity to tell the audience a little bit about your background. And you don't feel confined to only talk about your work with the Presque Isle Historical Society, even though we're going to focus on that later. But just give us a sense of where you come from, what you've done in your life, and just talk about you for a little bit.
Go ahead.
I don't know where to start. I guess I'll keep it focused on business and nonprofits. So I have served as the executive director of 4 nonprofits, and I went to high school here in Northern Maine, moved away for many years, and when I came back, I was looking for a place to volunteer and kind of blend some of that nonprofit experience. And one thing led to another, and I ended up being on the board of Presque Isle Historical Society. And growing up, I can't say that I really liked history very much. But over the years, as I got older, I really learned to appreciate knowing the history of where I lived. And having some experiences with historical interpretation in Virginia, which is very historic, I was really thrilled when I had the opportunity to volunteer for Presque Isle Historical Society and kind of put the different things that I'd learned into practice. So that, I guess, kind of sets the stage for where I came in. And
well, yeah, I'm a native of Presque Isle, and I left for a short time to go to college at University of Maine. But other than that, I've been in the area, and I've been very involved with philanthropic efforts, volunteering for organizations. I've been in the Kiwanis Club and the Masons, and you name it. And then got involved with the Historical Society right around the turn of the century. I can say that now that we're admitting to being historic. But anyway.
He's the least historic of any of us.
Right.
Of everyone on the board, he's the youngest one. So I won't tell you how old the rest of us are.
But
by the way, if the computer glitches in the middle, I think it's probably too late to blame Y2K, right?
Yeah, well, probably. Yeah, that's right. but no, so I just kind of got involved and have been working on different facets of the projects. And then, like I say, when Kim moved back, we were able to really kind of put a lot of things into motion through her efforts, and we've been very successful. And so, we're kind of excited about what's gone on with our society and with efforts in the community. And so
we've really kind of gone from an organization where the little old lady sat around and had tea to a very vibrant organization. We now have over 12 types of tours that we give on a regular recurring basis. We have over 80 presentations on topics of local historic interest.
Wow.
We have traveling exhibits. We're published on a regular basis. We present at a lot of conferences and symposiums. And so we're really known throughout the region. And all of that is on an all volunteer basis. We don't have paid staff.
Yeah. I think I have encountered in the past historic societies like the one that you described that you are not, right? Where they get around and reminisce and have a few interesting old artifacts that they'll direct people's attention to, but not very active. And it sounds like you've become the model of what a historic society can do and probably ought to do.
Well, I think we're very proud of where we are, and it really drives that home for us when people come from away and make comments, or even people here who aren't really history buffs come to some of our events or to our museum and say, and I shared this with you the other day, Anthony, where we had a local gentleman who's quite active in the community, but not really a history buff, not really a supporter of museums, so to speak, but he walked into Maysville Museum when we had our opening, looked around kind of in awe with his jaw hanging down and said, wow, if I didn't know better, I would not know I was in Presque Isle, Maine.
Yeah. I'm hearing that there is a lot of collaboration, a lot of, troubleshooting. I mean, on the tour, it was interesting to see how many people had their fingers in that particular pie to make it come together. And the museum I keep referencing is the one that Kim just referenced, by the way, audience members. It's the Maysville Museum, which, by the way, if you're a local person, it's just up the really big hill leaving town. Well, I guess you kind of go down and then back up, but a couple miles out of town on the right, that actually used to be a different town. But most of us wouldn't know that now. We would think, the next town you come to after you leave Presque Isle is Caribou, and that's, 15 minutes away. But it used to, that was not the case at all. Now, you mentioned, and I didn't know this until the other day when I was giving the tour, Kim, that you also said you used to be a model.
Yes.
Talk about that a little bit and how that has informed your creative sense.
Well, I guess it plays to the drama anyway, the dramatic side of me. I started when I was 16, and people don't realize there's all different kinds of modeling. And I have actually done several. A lot of it depends on your height and what your skills are. So I've done runway and commercial photography, like catalogs, even though I'm too tall for that. And one of my specialties is freeze modeling, which is like the mannequin in the window. So that has lent itself to a lot of different projects that we've done.
Yeah.
With our haunted lantern tours, for instance, that's come into play some there. And a lot of it has to do as well with the different costumes that we have. A lot of the costumes that our interpreters wear, for instance, at the event that you were talking about earlier, the Victorian Christmas at the SD, those costumes, those reproductions are pretty much all from my personal collection.
Yeah. And generally, one thing that stands out to me about modeling is you've got to have an eye for how things are composed and arranged in relation to each other. And if there's anything going on that's really made that museum at Maysville pop is just how beautifully it's all laid out. And there's a flow to it and a continuity as you walk through it, even though there's actually these little areas that are different sections. you don't feel like it's a just a random pile of things are sitting around each other. You really feel like you've had an experience when you move through it. And that,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I found that being on one side of the camera translated very well to being on the other side of the camera, if you will. So I enjoy doing photography, but I find that I'm able to kind of set the scene a little bit, and that goes into what you're saying.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because in a lot of situations, people find that if you just lay things out on a table, you'll go to museums and such, and it, it's the typical table with a few exhibits on it, and you have to go and look at the table, and that doesn't, lend itself to people moving through an exhibit or to experience things, and that's not what you see when you go to national museums. If you're at the Smithsonian, you walk through rooms, you walk through periods of time, and that allows you to have a connection greater than just the experience of looking at the piece of
Right.
historical importance. And so that, even though that, like you say, it's a small museum, it gives you a chance to kind of walk around and walk through the areas and experience it, rather than just be a participant that is totally on your end to do it. We try to involve you in different facets of it through interactive displays.
Right. To kind of use some of the current terminology, if you will. So a historical museum is a cultural heritage experience. And that's really what's important in cultural tourism today, is having that experience. It's not just enough to go see a photograph. People that go to museums today want to have an experience. And so here we are with this little museum that you were in the other day that measures 24 foot by 28 foot, which when you put it that way, it doesn't sound like a lot of space, but you were there. There's a lot in there.
Yes.
And yet you don't feel like you were, surrounded by this massive pile of stuff and that it's overwhelming. And yet you're having an interactive experience while you're in there, because many of the exhibits are interactive.
Yeah. We're going to get into that. We have some images that I took while I was there that I'm going to share and have you talk about some of those interactive exhibits. But before we get into the exhibits, let's talk about the greater scheme of the project itself and how that came into being. So where did the idea, this is a question I like to ask in all of these Making It North News, where did the idea come from?
Well, I guess the easiest way to say that is a combination of things. Kim had spent quite a bit of time researching a lot of different subjects for the programs that we've put on in other venues, to go to a school, to go to different meetings and such, and to do that. But some of what drove our actual displays and the concept was the items that we had either bought, donated, or otherwise to the society that piqued our interest long before the museum came, that became some of those displays and exhibits and programs. And so they lent themselves to expand in the sense you could make them into a museum display or an interactive display. And so that's where some of it came from. And then really you kind of expanded upon those things that were really our better exhibit pieces. I guess is the way I would kind of term them.
So I guess coming home after many years away, you kind of see things just a little differently. And so every time I would drive by that building, at the time it was empty, it was decrepit, it was falling apart, it was now owned by a private individual, and we had no idea what was going to happen to it. And the site itself is very significant historically. Like you referred to previously, Maysville was the town between Presque Isle and Caribou. In fact, Maysville started at Blake Street. That's how close it was. And that building or that site served simultaneously as the Maysville Town Hall, the Maysville District School, and the Maysville Grange. And knowing that it had such a rich history and that it was falling apart, I was very afraid that we were going to lose a piece of really important local history. And I kind of badgered our board a little bit, and Craig has this saying now. I'll come to him and I'll say, so I have an idea.
And I say, how much does that cost?
But he also knows that for the most part, if I say that, I'm ready to go write a grant to get the money. And we were able to get quite a few grants for the building renovation, and then several grants for the various exhibits inside. And then in addition, we have a local gentleman who owns a construction company, primarily commercial construction, who is now on our board. He's absolutely fabulous. We couldn't do what we did without him. And he said, I want to be the foreman of this project. I want to oversee it. And he went out and kind of called in favors and twisted arms and talked to tradesmen that he knew, told them the story of the building. Some of them said, oh, hey, I remember that building. My parents met there. And through these various local connections, we were able to get tradespeople to come in and give us their expertise for a donation. I mean, they donated their time to us, which has real value from a grant writing perspective, but it didn't cost us cash out of pocket in many of the instances. So it took us quite a while because we are an all-volunteer organization. We bought the building in 2011, in February of 2011, and we didn't open the museum until July of 2017.
Yeah. That sense of coming together and collaborating, that theme, not only is it there in making Maysville Museum come alive, but there are several moments when you walk through the museum when you see that same community spirit of collaboration. You saw that it's been at work up here this whole time, and I think it's one way that human creativity, it expresses itself. You have an idea, some people sees a need over here, and you have these other people who know how to do this. And once everyone sees the value, people come together, and that's the way these towns were built up here,
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And you mentioned when we were out there looking around, Anthony, you asked me, is this the original floor? These look like burn marks. And you're right, that is the original floor. We were able to save the floor and have those spots and be able to have a discussion, not just, hey, look, we had to save this, but we couldn't save this. We can actually show them the burn marks on the floor, the watermarks from when they, came in to do the firefighting. And the building and the renovation itself actually won a fairly prestigious award in November of 2017. Maine Preservation recognized us with an honor award for what we did there at the building. And it was really kind of neat because the contractor that I was talking about and I traveled down to Falmouth to receive the award. And we were one of 13 or 16 organizations that received awards, and we were the last on the agenda. And all these others were these huge, massive renovation projects that were commercial and had all these giant companies involved. And we're sitting there, and we're this little tiny nonprofit with no staff. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what are they going to say about us? And afterwards, people were coming up to us because they showed, some photos in a slideshow and commenting on what we had done and how important they felt it was. And it was really very touching and fulfilling that other people saw that.
Well, it's very different when you have a large commercial bank that's renovating a building and there's thousands of dollars, versus, a project being done, with $1 here and $1 there and volunteer efforts. And so they recognized that immediately because I'm sure they said, wow, I'm glad that bank of whatever is paying for this, because how would we ever do that? So it makes it more impressive because they understand the work being done because they're doing it, but they don't have the funding issues. And so, it really was an amazing effort. It really was.
I like to think, but I'm biased that's just a great example of the spirit of the county, you know, personally. But I'm sure there are places elsewhere that also have that great community spirit. But man, it's one of the privileges of getting to live up here. Okay, so you had some really great pieces, historical pieces, artifacts that would just make really great showpieces in a museum. Then you had this old building that was a key, important historical landmark that was on the verge of disappearing, forever. And then you had these other people on hand who wanted to donate their effort, and they had memories and ties to it. And all of this seems to be coming together in this natural synergy to become this one beautiful expression of an experiential, collage of history. And if that is not typical of how I find that the creative process works, I don't know what is. You take what you got and you see how you can fit it together, and then something cool pops out. I do that all the time in the kitchen. I don't know about you guys. All the time I'm looking, okay, we got this, and I can't really go to the store today. What can I make out of that? And you sometimes it comes out pretty great, and
you can come over and cook anytime, Anthony.
Yeah, okay. So let's talk about some of those pieces, the individual pieces. By the way, it might be a little bit disorienting for you guys for just a second. I am going to share my screen, which means my face is going to go away in front of you, and for the viewers, all of our faces are going to go away. And I'm going to bring up some of the images that I took, showing some of the things at the museum. And as I bring them up, I want you to talk about them and how you had to work around it and figure out ways to make this happen. So just hold on right now and let me share the screen. It'll take just a second. Okay, you should see my desktop now.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, let's pull this up first. So we'll talk about some of the individual pieces, I guess, first.
Okay.
So actually, I think I can have room. I can pull up a few and put them all across here. Then we can talk about them one at a time. I think the hair wreaths, I remember seeing one of those for the first time at the Esty House. And I just think that is one of the coolest things ever.
And honestly, the board makes fun of me because when I go on vacation, I go to museums. And so I can honestly say that is one of the most beautiful hair wreaths that I have seen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I made a reference to the past, to the creative spirit of the past. My screens don't want to cooperate now. And how what we're seeing happen and what we saw happen, or what you guys saw happen specifically, and making the Maysville Museum a reality is like an echo of the spirit of the county, of how people can come together and make do with what they've got. And the hair wreath is an example of how people take what they've got, and with a sense of love for those around them, they come together and make something that commemorates and memorializes the people in their lives. And so talk about, because I guarantee you that there are going to be a lot of people watching this, they don't even know what a hair wreath is. So tell us about a hair wreath.
Okay, well, hair has been a part of our history for thousands of years. We've used hair for different things throughout history. Mm-hmm. And hair jewelry started to come about in the 1800s, and the Victorians really raised it to an art level. And I think you will agree by looking at this that this is a piece of art. Hair was used, human hair was used to make jewelry that was primarily a way to memorialize the loss of a loved one. And a lot of it centered around the Civil War. So somebody's son, husband, brother went off to the war, and sister, wife, mother made a watch fob out of human hair so they could carry their watch on it. And then it kind of took a step forward again, because the Civil War is really the first time that there were not bodies to be buried.
Hmm.
And up until that time, the Victorians were very focused on death. They had a lot of rituals revolving around death. You know, prior to that, they would have the wakes in the house. They had a certain way that the house would be decorated. You would cover all the mirrors. You would put a black wreath on the door. You would cover all the clocks. I mean, all these things. They had special recipes of food that you would take to funerals because you would have to travel for long distances and the food had to keep over that time period. And so it all revolved around death. So now you've got no body to bury. And so the family wants to memorialize the loss of their loved one. And they take strands of human hair. And we can even, some of us who are a little older, longer in the tooth than others, can even remember things that kind of came out of this. So women would remember brushing their hair 100 times before they went to bed, right? That kind of came out of this. So you would brush your hair, you would take the hair out of the hairbrush and you would put it in a special little dish that was a hair receptacle. And then there were actually patterns, and it would say you need 100 strands of hair, 18 inches long, and you're going to braid them in this manner to come up with whatever pattern you were working on. And you actually have two different styles in this hair wreath. You have crimping, which
This
is
is right here, right?
easiest seen in that big flower at the bottom. And then you have looping, which are the petals right above that, correct? And you see that this was probably a whole family that participated in this based on all of the different colors of hair. There's red hair in there, there's blonde hair in there, there's brown hair in there, there's white hair in there. They would embellish the hair not only with the beautiful forms that they were making out of them, but they would add beads to it. And the hair wreaths were anywhere from 1 foot to 4 foot in height. They were always in a horseshoe shape, open at the top, symbolizing the ascension of the soul to heaven. You also see in this one the photo of the deceased in the center of the wreath. And the intention here was that these would hang on the parlor wall and they would be passed down from generation to generation. Now, in reality, do we see that today? Absolutely not. And the reasons are, there's a lot, but interior decor today isn't anywhere near like it was back in the mid 1800s. We now have light, airy rooms and, you know, gauzy fabrics on the window. We don't have the dark, heavy, embossed wallpaper and the, you know, velvet curtains. So this type of decor doesn't fit with our decor now. And the fact that society is so fragmented today, you don't have, you know, mom, dad, 10 kids and their spouses and kids all living on the same street. Now we're spread out all over the country and we have step families and step siblings. And so who do you pass this stuff on to? So society itself has changed, and that's why we don't really see this anymore. But it's a shame that this art form is really lost because it was really fabulous. The jewelry was breathtaking. We have some of that in our collection as well. We keep this in our Civil War collection because of that tie to the Civil War and memorializing the loss of their loved ones.
It's really beautiful stuff. Let me ask you, because you've, you know, worked with these pieces, and like you said, this was the Civil War, so we're talking, you know, a century and a half old, roughly here. Does the hair become brittle or fragile to handle, or how durable is it?
Well, if you were to touch that, it would feel brittle, but that's because of the fact that it's, you know, formed into these flowers, and some of it is actually wound around wires. So it's going to feel brittle. But when I was looking into this and doing my research, because I actually presented on this at the Deerfield Wellesley Symposium down at historic Deerfield in Massachusetts, and I was looking for some hair to actually see if I could make some of the pieces, and I actually found some of Vera Estes' hair. Now, Vera was born in 1894 and passed away in 1992. So imagine how long ago it was that her hair was long and brown, right?
Hmm.
And so I actually found some in one of her dresser drawers, and I pulled it out and measured it to see if it was long enough and attempted to make some of this. Now, it was remarkably, soft and flexible. Didn't smell really good. Um, and honestly, I've had a lot of kids do tours, and they have this kind of issue with the hair wreaths. They're fascinated by it, but at the same time, they're creeped out by it because they know it's human hair. And it never bothered me until I started handling the older hair.
Yeah.
And then I got a little creeped out.
Yeah, that is, I could see that. I mean, was a part of another person, Wow.
And I can honestly say that the people that made this were very, very talented, because it was extremely difficult.
I can imagine. I mean, it's so tiny to begin with. I was going to ask you how your effort turned out.
Yeah, no. Not well.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess at least in this sense, I mean, it's way better than a shrunken head. I mean, at least it's pretty, right?
Yes. Yes.
And I have very long hair, and so I've been used to braiding my hair and such since I was a small kid. But to do some of the things that they have done with hair, a lot of patience, a lot of talent, really good eyesight. And like I said, they actually had pattern books that they used, and they had a braiding table, a special table that they did this with, and it was like the size of a little bistro table. It had a hole in the center of it, and it had weights that would hang off the hair, so you could braid them using the weights. And I had Craig make me a miniature braiding table to take down for my presentation. And I struggled to find things to use for weights on it. I ended up using fishing weights.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Well, tell us about the uniform on the left here.
Well, I'll tell you what it is, and then I'll let Craig explain it more. So this is a uniform from the 1890s for a fraternal order called St. Aldamar's Commandery. And the reason it's on display is because it is so beautiful. The buttons, it's a double-breasted tunic-length jacket. The buttons are silk covered. It has a very ornamented belt, as you can see, and things would be hung from the belt during the different ceremonies that they would do. But the thing that I think just spoke to me the most, if you look on the edge of the sleeve, the cuff, and you see that cross in the golden red, and you look at the shoulders and you see the golden red epaulets, and then you look on the Nehru style collar where you can actually see it start to say St. Aldamar's in gold. That gold is actually metal wire.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And so St. Aldamar's Commandery was a part of the Masons.
Yeah, and the Masons, of course, have different facets of them, but of course, being a fraternal order, much of the part of it starting is, of course, a secret society. And this is once someone has gone through that initial part to become a Mason, then they have opportunities to move on to other facets of the fraternity. And so this would have been an extension of Masonry. So the Masonic temples you see around communities, and people could join this as well. And then in this, there is, I guess you say, costume and pageantry and vignettes of information that are presented. And so this would have been part of that. And much of that today does survive in other forms. And we do have different charitable organizations that are associated with masonry, and so they deal with things like childhood disorders. You see the burn centers, you see the occupational health type centers that help children with deformity. And then you have these fraternal orders like this St. Aldamar's that in modern times work with things like reading and children that have problems with reading or eyesight, and other types of things that are done to raise money for those issues, but generally is all surrounding philanthropic efforts to help children that have some issue that they're trying to help with. So this is is a very interesting thing to see, because along with this, different facets of this, they will have other ornamental things that they have which are also very beautiful. And so in the Masonic temples, which are generally open to the public, for people to come in and to look at, and oftentimes they'll have open houses, and I'd recommend people, if they haven't, to do that, because on display you'll see things dating back just in our own Masonic temple here in Presque Isle, Trinity Lodge, dates back to the late 1800s in the time of Civil War, and so some of the items date back to that time. And you'll see things as pictures, clothing, medals, and then some of the pageantry items, swords and other items which are very beautifully ornamental. And so anyway, it's part of the Masonic fraternity is what this is from.
This one was based on the Knights of Templar, and it would have included, when they were fully dressed and fully decked out, as Craig mentioned, it would have included lots of medals. It would have included a ceremonial sword. The hats that went with this were absolutely gorgeous. And they kind of remind me of a pirate's three-pointed hat. And they had a big ostrich plume on them, and they had more of the metal braiding. It was really quite breathtaking and very visual when they were in full regalia.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it's all very artistic, But
yes.
What? By the way, what is hanging from the belt?
I believe that in these items, these are braided, metal braided bands, and what that was used for in ceremony, I guess I can't really answer, because this is long before anything that I've experienced.
The small ones remind me of things that might have held, like the Masonic aprons. That's kind of what it reminds me of, but I haven't actually found a picture of just one person using those, so I could tell what they held. The photo that I have, all the gentlemen are sitting down, so I can't really see if they had something hanging from their belts. But I wanted to include the belt on the display because it was just so unique.
And things of this nature, of course, they would have the vignettes that are part of the ceremony would be from different periods of time, so they may date back to very early times of man, and they may come up in time. Of course, this being at the age it's at, would have been 50 years or more, predating some of the more recent vignettes, which deal with things during World War II. Right. So it's it could be from most any time period and used for a lot of different things because of the age of the fraternity and the vignettes depicting those different time periods.
And these vignettes were like little performances, little plays.
Little plays. Yeah, and they would all be centered on giving a message to men that were involved in the fraternity.
A lesson or a moral.
Yeah, lessons and morals about being a good person and doing unto your fellow man things that you would want done unto you. And so it was all centered around good morals.
Yeah. And this uniform is, like 130 years old, and it's pristine. Mm-hmm. There's no moth holes. There's no, loose wires or threads. Everything is still beautifully colored. I mean, it's in absolutely mint shape.
And
it's really beautiful.
this was donated out of the local Masonic lodge, and so had been in our storage room in the basement for, you know, we don't know how long, but obviously, you know, like I said, it had been out of heat, light, you name it, for a long time. So
Yeah,
it's very
and
good
to look
shape.
130 years old, that's for sure. And the last image we have up here, I took a few shots like this just to give the viewers a sense of how the exhibits are set up, of how there's a sense of openness, and yet there's also really a whole lot of things to look at, and that just speaks to the eye of of Kim and Craig and everyone else who had a hand in setting this up, which I'm not sure who all had a hand. I'm sure Kim was central. But, and this is not a really good shot. I wonder if I can get a little more of it here. Yeah, this is better. There we go. And this is actually kind of the middle here of the whole building.
Right.
So you can see how you could easily access it by walking through the middle, but I actually went on the perimeter because you can walk around the perimeter as well.
Sure.
And we'll see some more shots.
Handicapped accessible, so you know a wheelchair could easily move in between the exhibits. And if someone was in a wheelchair, they would still be able to access all of the interactive features. You know, the buttons that turn the different musics on, for instance, the Maine State song, the fighting song from the Aroostook War. They could turn the pieces on the remarkable recyclable cow to see what the different pieces of the cow were used for back in the 1800s or today. What you're kind of looking at here, you see our restored telephone switchboard.
Yes, before you get into that, let me pull up a couple better images of that. I think this is one here. Yeah, there we go.
And one other thing too that I just would mention about is that the height of the ceiling, of course, makes the room look very open, and the building is on display too. And so not only do we have the exhibits, but the building itself is a display in and of itself, and so that makes it very interesting. Yeah.
Speaking of using what you've got and making and pulling it together and making one beautiful thing out of it, this light fixture came from somewhere else, didn't it, Kim?
It did. I own a home that was built in 1909, and that light fixture was in my kitchen. Not really my style, even though I like to be true to the period of the house. I took the light fixture down and I saved it because I really felt that it would do very well out at Maysville. And
Yes.
so that's where it is.
And it really does. It really fits beautifully with the whole scenery there. So tell us about the switchboard and where you got it, what kind of shape it was in, and what it's able to do now.
You want to talk about that?
Well, the one thing, this is kind of a good to go back and hit on that original topic that we discussed. The original members of the Historical Society were able to amass a number of items, which mostly ended up in the basement of City Hall, and so this was one of those such items that was moved around and ended up in a garage that we own, and so this being last used in the 1950s here in Presque Isle, was an item that originally this architecture would have been in the teens to 20s. They were designing this, and then they would have had the basic frame, and then it was updated over the years. So this was actually an item that floated around in our storage, if you will, until, I'll have Kim tell you the story, but until we were able to keep saying, geez, that's something, we should do something with that. It's a really neat item. And
yeah, we owned two of these, and they were both in very sad state of repair. What you see now has been totally renovated and did not look anything like this when we took it out of the shed, trust me. And I kept saying, I'd really like to restore this. I'd really like to have an exhibit using this. I'm not really sure where I'm going with it yet. And I decided I was going to write a grant to restore it. And the concept was the social impact of the telephone switchboard on society in rural northern Maine. And it really did have a huge impact on society here. It was a great social equalizer. Didn't make any difference if you were rich or poor. You could both use the telephone to summon medical help, to talk to your families that have moved across the country. So in the process of writing the grantor asked me if there was anyone else in the state of Maine who was doing something similar to what I wanted to do with this. And I didn't know. So I had to go and find out. I found that there was a telephone museum down in the Ellsworth area. And so a couple of us went down to see what they had and what they did. And their museum is fabulous. If you ever have a chance to go, it's really wonderful. But it's not what I wanted to do with this particular piece of machinery. And so while I was there, this goes back to our earlier conversation of local connections and tradesmen and collaborations within the community, so to speak, even though it wasn't really our community that we collaborated with. So I met a gentleman down there who was originally from out of state, but moved to southern Maine to work in the telephone industry. And he's got to be in his 80s.
I would, yeah.
And I told him why we were there at the telephone museum, what we had and what we wanted to do. And he said, I'm going to drive up and see it. And I said, really? He said, yeah, I'm going to come up and see what you have. So he and his wife came up on a weekend and they looked at the 2 units and he said, all right, here's my deal. You transport these 2 units down to Bucksport, where I live. You give me one of them to keep for parts. You pay me $500 and I will totally restore this switchboard to working condition.
Oh, wow.
And he did. And you saw it in action. You know that it's amazing. And so we have 2 antique telephones attached to it. One is a candlestick phone from 1910, and one is similar to a rotary phone, only there's no dial on it, from about 1928, and they work. This was originally intended, this particular unit was intended to be a long distance switchboard, but we are using it as a local switchboard connection, just so we can show people how switchboards worked and how phones worked in the early beginning. It's a huge hit with students, the young school-age kids, because this really gives them a feeling for where what they're used to as the phone, the cell phone, came from, and how you had to be connected by wires, and how it involved several people to make a phone call, not just, pick up the phone and dial.
Right.
And so it's really very informative and educational and interactive. We can show people how they knew what to bill for long distance calls, and some of what the operators did. So it's quite fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating. We did it, and just to make sure that everyone's clear out there that watches this later, the other day, Kim, Craig, and I actually made a phone call with this. Craig called me. Kim was the operator in between. She unplugged one wire, plugged another wire in, plugged wires through levers, and made it happen. And so I got to really see it in action. It's really interesting. Something that was also interesting in what you just said, Kim, is you had these 2 pieces that were in really bad shape, but you knew you wanted to do something with them, but you weren't exactly sure what yet.
Right.
And then as you went through the process and you talked to this person, you talk to that person, and then someone asks you if you want a grant or they want to do what you want to do. Well, at that point, they're asking you a question about what you do want to do with it. You had said, I had these pieces. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to restore them and do something with them. Well, by the time it got to that process, or got to that question, it had started taking form, and you had something to tell them.
Right.
And then it took even more shape as you worked through it, and you met this gentleman downstate who restored it, and it became a working thing. And that's the adventure of doing creative things, is you have this little spark of an idea,
Right.
that you don't know what it's going to be when it's over, but you keep collaborating, you keep improvising and flexing, and it becomes this beautiful thing that's organic. It's whole.
Exactly.
It all fits together in the end. Um, are either of you familiar with the author O. Henry?
Yes.
He was known for writing a type of ending, a surprise ending, a twist at the very end that you never saw coming. And some of the classic examples of that is the story unfolds, the tension builds, and at the very end, the protagonist wakes up and realizes it was all a dream.
Right.
And that was kind of in vogue for a short time, but then it fell really out of fashion because frankly, it's kind of a cheap and easy way to resolve a conflict in a book, right? I mean, anybody can do that. You can bring us all to the precipice and wonder whether we all die, and then just say, hey, I didn't know how to end it, so I just had to wake up from the dream. Right. So, and what the problem with that is what happens in the end is not organic. It's not something that arose out of what you had. It's some cheap, thing to throw in the end that doesn't require a lot of ingenuity or work or imagination. And so that's why it fell out of vogue. Right. And so what we're seeing here is all these things are coming together, and they're all parts of the old, parts of local people and their ideas and their craft, the ideas in your head and your history, your eye for composition, and it's all coming together and becoming this one beautifully fused thing of continuity.
And I think in many cases, Anthony, I think the artifact kind of writes its own story, because it sort of dictated where I was going with this. And we work a lot with Maine Humanities Council. And anytime we get a grant through Maine Humanities Council, obviously we have to incorporate the humanities. And the humanities have to do with dialogue and discussion and, pondering why things happened or how they happened. And this was a humanities grant. So not only did it take on that part of the story, but it also then involved the visual displays that are around it. It involved oral history interviews with former telephone operators. The gentleman that we mentioned, Dave Thompson, that did the restoration for us, has actually come up here to Presque Isle from Bucksport 2 years in a row on our grand opening day for the season to actually show everyone and give a real demonstration on how this works for us. And he does that all on his own. He's not paid for any of that. So we humans, we create things because we want to share, Right.
Well, I'm going to pull up, we're going to look at a couple more images before we're done here. Trying to look here it is. All right, I'm going to pull up this because I think first of all, it's a creative use of a very common system seen in office spaces, and I love that, the way you repurpose it and make something really cool out of it. And then I really want to talk about this piece as well. Oh, if I can move it now. Of course I can't. Yeah, there we go. So tell us, what is this partition? I think people who've worked in any kind of call center or office space, they recognize this immediately. But you wouldn't know it if you never worked in those environments, that this wasn't originally designed to put up displays and be this cool 4 different experiences in one small space.
Well, that is our agriculture, history, her story, our story exhibit. And it's about the fact that we have an agricultural background here in this area of northern Maine. And so I wanted 4 different pieces here. And I wanted different little vignettes, so to speak, in each of the 4 spaces. And so I said to Craig, how can I do this? What can I use to put up these panels that I want to have made, and to put the little artifacts and props in the center of them? What can I use? And so that was his creativity. So I'll let him tell more about that.
Well, yeah, these were just office dividers with fabric on them. And so we removed the fabric and then we painted them from the normal beige office color to black, and then installed them. And then we used Velcro to attach the pictures to them, which are mounted on a plastic board that you commonly get from the printers now. And so this was, just a repurposing of items that we got for free a number of years ago from the local bank when they were remodeling the entire building, and said, anyone that wants this stuff, come get it. And so we didn't know what to use it for then exactly, but again, it's just kind of one of those items that, setting there lent itself beautifully to display. So it's worked out marvelously.
And you saw that we've used that concept more than once, because the photograph display around the switchboard is a 3-sided partition.
Mm-hmm. Well, by the way, just in passing, I want to draw the audience attention to this spot right here. That's an example of burn mark left from when the place almost burnt down.
And in the other picture, right behind the table on the floor, there's a dark spot. That's also a burn mark.
Right. That building burned 3 times. It burned completely twice and was rebuilt. The footprint it has now is left from the last time it burned completely, which was in 1939. It was originally built in the 1870s, and it burned twice in the early 1900s. And then 1939, the footprint it has now, and then in 2004, it burned partially again. And that's what burn marks you see are from, that 2004 fire.
So tell us about this very interesting looking table.
Well, this is a kind of a neat concept. And again, it's something that was taken from visits to other museums. And so with looking at the table itself, you'll notice the top is circular. You'll notice that the board and the grain of the wood is kind of straight and it's connected. And so our craftsman that did this actually was involved with the Acadian Heritage Days. And so he built some items, and one of them being a wagon for them to recreate some of the early settlers up in the Madawaska area. And so he used the top of the table as a piece of one of the wagon wheels that he made off an original early cart, and then constructed the rest of the table, and then did the top. And so the top has little potato barrels attached to it as handles, and has a window. And as you turn the window, it goes from an explanation of what it is to different numbers. And underneath each number, it describes a different farm implement that was used by farmers or loggers or whomever in the area. And that is on the wall. So in the first picture, you see a metal plier-looking apparatus, and then a part of a saw on the wall right next to the quilt. And each of the numbers are numbered, and then tells the story of what the implement is. And so they can look on the wall, see the item, and then turn the top of the table to learn more about that item.
Yeah. That's just one example of the many interactive things that are going on. Kim mentioned earlier that on the wall there are buttons you can press, and you can actually hear anecdotes and music, historical songs. In front of Kim in this image, this is a place where an iPad normally sits, where you can actually watch clips of historical things. And so, I mean, there's a really nice subtle merging of newer ideas that are really framing the old ideas so that they shine here. And
I think you have to do that. You have to draw in today's technology to draw in the eye of the younger audience, which also helps make the different exhibits interactive and experiential. So we have QR codes. We have
there were some of those on the earlier pictures. I'm going to minimize this. Yeah, right here. Like, here's one.
We have QR codes. We have, like you said, buttons you press and hear music. We have things that you move and turn. We have scavenger hunts. We have 2 different kinds of scavenger hunts there.
Oh, yes.
One for kids and one for older kids.
Yeah, we're going to stop sharing the screen now so we can see each other again.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. We didn't even get to talk about the cows yet. Man, time flies. So real quickly, I just want to mention, since I teased everyone, the scavenger hunt, doesn't one of the scavenger hunts connect directly to the whole cow theme?
It does.
Yeah, yeah.
We, as you noticed when we were there are cows everywhere. And some of the cows are
Not live cows, by the way, guys.
no live cows. We're directly a part of some of the exhibits. In some cases, like why are barns red? The remarkable recyclable cow. Those are all active exhibits there. But even starting outside, you start seeing cows. We have cows out by our planters. We have cows on the outside door. And the reason is we want people to notice the cow, and we want them to say, why cows? Why do we see cows everywhere? And that's because of a little something called the Aroostook War, which took place in 1838. And to tell a real quick historical story, and not, not in its full depth, obviously, but when the American Revolution ended, there really wasn't a border that could easily be recognized anyway, established between what's now Maine and Canada. There was some verbiage that said, well, it was in the Highlands, but nobody really knew what the Highlands was. And it wasn't much of an issue until Maine became a state in 1820, and the state started giving out grants of free land to encourage settlement here. So Canada wanted this part of the state, and the state wanted this part of the state. And the reason is because of our vast acreage of trees. We had beautiful, beautiful, tall, sturdy trees. And the trees were used to make masts for ships, to build homes, to heat your homes, to cook your food. That wood was very, very important. And you started having some skirmishes going on between people saying, this is Canada, this is the United States. One of those skirmishes actually took place here in Maysville over a cow. And it was called the Incident of Arnold's Cow. And that's why we have cows everywhere. And we want people to ask us about the cows so we can tell them the whole story of Arnold's cow.
Yep. And you mentioned story. So we've gone from visual arts to modeling, to composition, to narrative. Yeah. So there's a lot of really cool creative stuff going on in there. And it also tells us kind of where we got a lot of our ideas about what's interesting and what constitutes something being creative now. I've really enjoyed this. I love the tour. I can't wait till you have the grand opening. I can't wait to bring my daughter up there so she can experience what it used to be like if she wanted to call a friend.
Right. Yeah.
And it's the bicentennial of the state of Maine. So for the grand opening, we'll have whoopie pies, the Maine state treat, and Moxie, the Maine state beverage. We'll be making quill pens from real quills, and we'll be learning to write with them. So again, more fun and creativity.
I know. I can't wait. That's going to be super exciting. And as far as when, I think we're kind of waiting to see how this COVID-19 thing plays out. But when it gets out of the way, be sure to let us all know so that we can come out and learn all those interesting things and experience the way things used to be done.
Sure will.
All right. Guys, have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for agreeing to the interview.
Thanks, Anthony.
I really enjoyed it. Bye-bye.
Bye.